Everyone knows that this panel is on user acquisition, and we have three great panelists who spent some time talking with me last week to give you a really great, exciting talk on how to get your first users as well as how your strategy changes after that. So we're going to make the introductions very quickly so we can go ahead and get on to the main questions here. We have Gagan right in the center from Udemy. He is transforming the world of online education right now with his company. And currently he has received over $4 million worth of funding and has over 1,000 instructors on his site. Over there at the end is Brian from Keep. He is actually transforming the world of online advertising with Keep, which is a mobile rewards network. He has been featured in Forbes and Dow Jones, and as of about right now, they have about 12 million users. The person immediately to my left is Roger. He's a serial entrepreneur and angel investor. He started his first company in 2006, and he was also the founder of Mafia Wars, which reached 45 million users. So let's go ahead and start. The first question on the table is strategies on how to survive without any users. And Brian actually thought it was impossible, but he does have a bit of wisdom for you, and that's basically under the headline of Get Hungry. So Brian, do you want to take it away?
I guess if you don't have any, you're doing it wrong. And obviously it means you have to reach out to as many people as you can. And in the beginning for us, it was a matter of finding, for us, our user acquisition is very different than what you would originally sort of perceive as being a organic acquisition process for like an app. And as a network, we have a chicken and egg, right? We have both game developers that we have to bring on board to sort of integrate our SDK, and on the other end, brands that are able to give rewards. And so the game developers, basically, it was just, in the chicken and egg aspect, you have to have either the chicken or the egg. And so you have to go pummel one and drive a truck at it. And we decided to go after the game developers first because we realized that the value was the most intense for them. The proposed value was, you get rewards that you basically are able to reward your players with real rewards from top brands, and you're able to earn money off of that. But then the question was, like, you don't have any rewards, how can you how does this work for us? And so we decided to foot the bill for our first set of rewards first, and then use that as the way we sort of accelerated the acquisition on the developer side. So we just did what we could to make it work. And it wasn't exactly the prettiest way to do it, but it was a way, and we did it, and it worked.
Roger also had some things to add on this. He was great in being able to say that, well, there's going to be a time where you don't have any users, and there is a strategy for survival, and it breaks down into two halves. There's a financial half, and then there's an emotional half. So do you want to go ahead and answer a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so obviously on the financial side, just operationally speaking, you have to try to keep burn rate as low as humanly possible. For my first startup, well, I guess I should say the second one in the Facebook app space, the one that I sold to Zynga, we actually built 18 or 19 applications. I think we built 17 before we built our first game. So we had all these different products, and we kept thinking, this is Facebook, this is a new platform, this is revolutionary. To succeed on Facebook, we have to build different applications than anyone has ever seen. So we were building these applications that were really optimized for the social space. Like, we built these social utilities. We had this kind of like degrees from Kevin Bacon type application, where we basically would tell you when you joined, like, how many degrees you were from different celebrities based on the network we'd put together. And we didn't know they were really celebrities, but it would be people with celebrity names. So if there's somebody named Chuck Norris, we would just be like, all right, maybe that's the real Chuck Norris. We'd try to figure out based on friends and things like that. So we launched all these applications, and we'd spend like 3 or 4 days on each one, and ultimately they kept failing and failing and failing. And I think we had 2 that were moderate successes out of the 16 or 17. So we were trying to be like really, really original. So what we found was that we were able to have so many bullets basically because our burn rate was nothing. We were basically operating out of my apartment down in Austin, Texas, and we just woke up every day in our PJs, coded for 17 hours, and then went to bed. And we didn't have an office. We just ordered like Chinese food and eat ramen. So we had and I only had $8,000 in savings when I started doing this. And by the time we turned cash flow positive, I think I had $1,000 left in the bank. But if we hadn't kept burn rate so low, that wouldn't have been possible. So that's definitely the financial operational side, and there's some good answers on Quora on how to keep burn rate really low. On the emotional side, what helped us the most was really focusing on what I would call building the light at the end of the tunnel. So what was exciting to us emotionally, despite so many failures, was we're like, we know we can win on Facebook. Other people are winning on Facebook. What does the light at the end of the tunnel look like? And really just focusing on that and trying to find it, then build it, helped us probably more than anything else, because the emotional side was worse than the financial side. We actually almost ran out of gas emotionally before we did financially.
And then just to let you know about how we're trying to approach this conversation so you can follow it in your head, is we're going from 0 to 60. So we'll go ahead and start with the conversation at how do you get any users and how do you survive before you do, and then we'll take it up to what happens after you already have your launch strategy and you're good, and how do you get more users. And then the most common mistakes that people make. So that's kind of the structure for today. And for my panelists, I know that I've cherry-picked some of the best bits from our pre-conversations together. Feel free to go ahead and pop in at any time.
This is really formal. We should just shake it up a bit
Yeah.
and just like talk about random shit.
If you want to, yeah.
No,
go ahead.
about user acquisition, of course. But I totally agree with you, dude, about the emotional side. And a lot of it is very taxing in the beginning because you don't think that, you don't know, you're trying to validate, right? And you'll pummel them with different sort of types of things that you think that they would bite onto. But then eventually our pitch had to modify quite a bit, especially our value proposition to our developers, because what I realized in the beginning was when we talked about sort of these three things, right? Monetization, retention, and engagement. They're very buzzwordy things. And when you mention monetization, when you first talk to certain people, it becomes the primary point of focus and everything else fades into the wayside. And we realized that was a big issue, right? Because when our platform is able to encompass so many other things, right, that engagement is key because rewards become almost like a nugget of addiction for some of these users, that it becomes an additional way for them to engage and retain their users, that just becomes who cares about that? Money. Tell me more about the money. And I'm like, wow, hold on, like step back, right? So, now we've created a different dynamic where we're saying, hey, this is about retention and engagement. And it's nice if your game does really well and it earns more money, but that is not the primary focus of this platform for you.
Yeah, that was something else that kind of kept us sane, was limiting the number of things we were worrying about effectively. And this is also something I did at Zynga. I probably launched 7 or 8 games there, really small ones, aside from Mafia Wars and Fishville, because we had the X-Wars platform, so we could crank games out off of that in like a week. But what really kept us sane was purely focusing on acquisition, retention, and engagement, because we always assumed that we could figure out how to monetize it later. And of course, that's a luxury sometimes you have and sometimes you don't. At a big company, you have the funding of the big company to work off of, and you're maybe just a general manager or a VP within this ocean, and you have some P&L that you're running, et cetera. But obviously, at your own startup, you need some revenues. I usually recommend if you're only going to be running, if you think you're going to run a company for about 4 years, and you have a certain financial goal or a certain valuation goal that you want to get to, I always tell people, and I do some angel investing too, don't be afraid to give away enough equity so you have runway where you can try a lot of different things and focus more on acquisition and retention. Because if you try to just go really lean early on and focus on buying your own way through the whole process, you probably won't reach the same valuation goal at the end of 4 years as you would otherwise, and actually your personal equity would be worth much less.
It's easier said than done, right? That balance is so key because you don't know. I mean, how frugal do you need to be? How much equity do you need to give up? Like all that type of stuff. It's like you won't know until after. That's the shitty part.
Yeah, it's a careful balance.
Yeah, but ultimately it's also not that scientific, right? Like ultimately you've got 3 weeks, 5 weeks during which you're raising a round, and at that point you make a lot of split-second decisions about how much you're going to raise, what the valuation ends up sort of becoming. For me, it was a 15-second conversation, the valuation with the angel investor on the other side of the table. So I think like ultimately it's not as much about optimizing for how much money you raise or valuation that much ahead of time. It's about what you said about focus. Don't think about the valuation or the amount of money you need to raise until it's time to do that. And before that, just focus entirely on whatever your core goals are, like user acquisition or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. My point was more around just making sure you have enough money and enough runway to emotionally be able to focus on acquisition and retention and focus on users, et cetera.
So Roger and Gagan, you guys actually both had agreed in our conversations together about how the launch strategy actually doesn't matter. And you actually had a great story, which I call the Rambo effect, on how your company approached that initial launch strategy. Do you want to share it?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, basically we're a marketplace, right? We have really smart experts, right? Well, that's what we try to have. People who can go on our site and teach things. And then we have learners, people who come on our site and learn things. Well, the classic problem, just like Brian said, in a marketplace business is that if you don't have supply, then demand doesn't care about you. And if you don't have demand, supply doesn't care about you. So the first thing we did before we even launched, we were like, okay, we need to launch this, we need to put this up. But we had no content. So it was like, hey, come to Udemy and learn something, but there's nothing to learn. So what we did actually is we built this this crawler, like this product that allowed us to pull content off of YouTube. And so our first like 1,000 courses were free courses off of YouTube that we just pulled into Udemy. So when people came onto Udemy, they thought that they were watching videos that were posted by all these leading experts like Steve Blank and Stanford and Harvard or whatever, but really it was just open source content off of YouTube. And so that allowed us to encourage users when they first came on to find value. This content was great, and on YouTube it was doing nothing because it was, because YouTube's this massive ocean of useless content. And we just aggregated all that stuff in one place, and so users found it valuable to come. Then we got a certain number of users, and then we started calling up instructors and saying, hey, we've got like 20, 30,000 users. You should come check us out and try us out. And that was like one of the major ways that we got our first couple of instructors, was basically faking that they existed in the first place.
And I really like the idea that you said that, the point of being that scalable user acquisition actually doesn't matter in the very beginning, because you can actually do things that aren't scalable. And then Roger, you had a story which I call the pop and die launch strategy, and you wanted to tell everyone here that the launch strategy doesn't matter.
Yeah. In my recent experience angel investing, I meet so many startups that when I ask them about user acquisition, they immediately start enthusiastically telling me about their launch strategy. They'll say, oh, well, I know all these bloggers, and I have this partnership with this second-tier celebrity, and they're going to tweet about us and all this. And it's like, so you've been working for months and months to build this product you're about to launch where you don't have a sustainable user acquisition strategy? Is that what I'm hearing? Because so many people will get really excited about their launch strategy, and they'll put together a really good one because they're like electrons, right? They're taking the path of least resistance. And the easiest thing to do is focus on your launch strategy and not focus on a sustainable user acquisition strategy, which is actually hard. And if really, ultimately, if you want to avoid hard problems, you shouldn't be in entrepreneurship. Making a lot of money is hard. So really, what I recommend to people is focus much less on the launch strategy and much more on not even coming close to launching until you have a sustainable user acquisition strategy. Because I've seen this go south, particularly in gaming, where Fishville actually, this sort of happened to Fishville. If you look at Fishville's metrics, there's public sites where you can see Facebook application metrics. You see it had a big pop and then it kind of trailed off. And the reason behind that, behind the scenes, what happened was the core game for Fishville was in the wrong place. It was different than games like Mafia Wars or Cityville, where you have some energy mechanic and you're actually charging people incrementally to use the game. Fishville was unlimited. You could just go in every day and kind of feed your fish and buy some more fish for free. So really nobody was spending money on it. But once we launched, it was too late to change it because people already had millions of fish, and it would, they would have been too upset. So we should have thought a lot more about that before we launched.
Brian, do you have something to say?
No, I think it's funny how you talk about the launch thing, because I assume no press whenever you're launching. I think usually launch strategies for most people are like, we're gonna get this blogger, and it's gonna be awesome, and they're gonna be writing about us, and it's gonna be great. I'm like, you're not gonna get anybody writing about you. Just assume that nobody's gonna write about you. And the patience is number one, right? Here's a close call. When we were launching our network, 2 days before we launched, I called up our PR guy, and I was just like, and first of all, that was a big mistake. Don't hire a PR guy for your launch stuff. Doesn't make any sense. I'm like, do we have any launch press lined up? He's like, we have one kind of. I'm like, okay, no then, right? He's like, no. I'm like, oh fuck, And so basically what I did that weekend was I just spammed as many reporters as I could find, which is usually not a good tactic, but not spamming. Be really nice to them. But it was like a Hail Mary because we realized that we needed to have some attention go out. But it really didn't pop until like the day after our launch was supposed to happen. And so again, like we just need to assume that there's no press that's going to be slated for launch, so you can be patient around how this stuff is going to develop. First of all, a lot of people will go, oh my God, like I'm going to keep an embargo, it's a secret, like it's going to be stealth until we launch. Nobody gives a flying fuck about your product until you launch anyway. So don't assume that someone's going to write an article because you're so cool. Like it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. One of the things that's really interesting is so we actually had a pretty good launch, if you would call it that. I mean, we don't talk about launches at our company, and I don't think that's it's not intentional. We never talked about how we don't want to talk about launches. It just doesn't occur to us, right? So when we announce our fundraising or whatever else, we just sort of decide 3 days beforehand. We call up some press we know, and then we do it and we move on with our lives. But when we were doing our first launch, it was a little bit more of a big deal because our first time entrepreneurs, etc. And the reality is we look back a year and a half later at the users that we got from launch and then the users we've gotten through our more sustainable user acquisition channels, and they were 10 times more useless. Or less valuable financially or in terms of engagement or anything else. The reality is that our product is fairly highly relevant to the type of people who are reading publications like TechCrunch, GigaOM, etc. And yet, nonetheless, almost all of the users who came through those channels were completely meaningless to us. And aside from value while fundraising, which there definitely is value in press while fundraising, in terms of user acquisition, it's almost completely meaningless. And I would say that there's no reason to think of that as anything more than an afterthought. There's no point in not getting 15,000 users in 3 or 4 days, but there's no point in thinking too much about it either.
One of my favorite moments in speaking with Brian was actually, and one of the fun things about FailCon is you actually get to hear behind the scenes stories of how these incredibly experienced and very successful entrepreneurs almost failed. And I heard the Infinity G35 story, which...
So this is, we were very lucky that we got off scot-free on this and we were able to cover ourselves. But one of the funny things is when we first launched, we did demo to brands and the agencies are working with what our rewards could look like, right? They were like, what does it look like? And we were like, we sat down as a team, we're like, let's just imagine the dream reward arsenal you could think of, from cars to cruises to vacations to bottles of Coke or whatever it is. And so this was all the most ideal we could find. And this was a year ago when we made this. And so when things started picking up a few months ago on our network and, new games started coming on, we had tens of millions of new impressions every day. And it was starting to become a little bit it started ransacking our servers essentially. And something broke and the test rewards, which were never supposed to go out, started going out. So within a period of a minute that we caught this, we knew it was going out for 60 seconds. Several hundred went out. And needless to say, there were a few people around the world that were super fucking stoked to think that they won an Infinity G35, which was not the case. So we immediately found these people were so sorry, totally, and we were covered. I mean, the images said sample on them, and then the email that they would have gotten if they redeemed would have said sample. So, I mean, they would have known, but some people were just I knew it was too good to be true, and I'm like, yeah, we're so sorry. But just funny things like that, and we just laughed because that was just one of the, we would have never expected that to happen, but then the fact that it happened was just totally, I think you probably knew that this was fake, but the fact that people actually emailed us and went, I think I got an Infinity G35, where do I redeem this? And I'm like, dude, calm down, that doesn't happen yet. It may happen soon, but yes, not yet.
I'm looking at Gagan specifically because I know that, in talking about all of this, and we're really trying to think what sort of infrastructure do you need to have in place, and I know you have a story on it, but also you, in the very beginning, as you said, not just the crawler that you had, what kind of infrastructure did you have in terms of people? And you have a good story on that.
Oh yeah, so we talked about earlier the natural problem pre-launch of trying to get instructors on the site because they didn't find it valuable without any users. We still had the same problem after launch because we only had 4,000 or 5,000 users that came from launch. And interestingly enough, we launched like probably like May 20th or something. May 16th was the first time we had been in like public. We had been public for months before that, but that was the first time we ever talked about it. And obviously, like one of the biggest challenges was, well, when we started, we had, I had about 10 grand in my bank account. And so I had a very similar problem that Roger talked about, which is we had no money. And we figured like, hey, we need some users in order to prove to investors that they should spend money on us. And so what we did actually was we put out a Craigslist ad for internships at Udemy. And keep in mind, at this point at Udemy, there was one full-time person. He was completely broke. That was me. And we were working out of a Palo Alto house on a wooden dining table on wooden chairs. And that was the extent of Udemy, right? Like my co-founders would go to work every day, and they would come back to the house. And we put out ads for internships, and we said explicitly in the internship, we won't provide you with a stipend, but we will be great references for you. And this was like 2010, right? So it was a perfect time to be looking for interns. We actually ended up hiring about 10 or 15 over the next unpaid interns over the next 3 to 6 months or something. And for the most part, these people were basically provided with a highly educational experience. And what their job was on a daily basis to call and email as many people as possible who are teaching online to convince them to use Udemy. And they weren't the most talented people in the world, and there were some very smart people in there, but there were also a lot of duds. Out of those 15 people, maybe 7 survived after like 3 weeks. But it was an awesome way to grow our workforce really early on, because we basically had an army of people calling people every single day, telling them that they should use Udemy. And it's probably what got us.
I don't endorse that, by the way. I don't know. I don't know if college students want to be abused like that.
Well, I would tell you that almost all of them still email me and ask me
Okay,
for
they like you,
advice
so
on
you were
it.
nice to them. But I mean, like, they were highly educational experience. Like, I don't know how that feels.
Fair enough. I would say you do what you got to do.
Fair enough. No, I know.
When you're in the
If you
trenches.
need it, yeah, I know. I'm just saying, no. I think it's smart, but I just don't encourage you to abuse free labor like that. I mean, we had that too. We actually had interns come in, but we gave them sort of at least sort of a small amount. And I know you didn't have money, of course, but it was sort of like how can we cover your like personal expenses? Like how do we pay for you to like at least travel out here or something like that, like stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's nice if you can, but I think this is a great example of the kind of hustle you need to really grow something and to survive when you have no users and no funding. We had to do things like that too. We were hiring these interns from the University of Texas at Austin, and we actually paid these guys by the hour. We tried to play up the experience, but we also were able to pay them a little bit. If I could have gotten away with not paying people, I definitely would have. So, certainly provided some promise of maybe hiring them later. And it's maybe it's outside the scope of this conversation, but it might be neat if you did a blog post on that. I mean, that's really cool.
Yeah, we did actually do a blog post where we talked about the actual Craigslist ad that we use. It was like highly effective. We got hundreds of applications, which is kind of weird. And then the other thing, I mean, keep in mind that for most people who are looking for jobs right now, if you have absolutely zero experience, you went to college and didn't do any internships at all, a summer internship is actually hugely valuable to you because you actually have something on your resume instead of nothing. And so I would argue that I would do the exact same thing if I was a college student that just graduated and had no internships over the summers. I would go and work for free somewhere. And if any of you are looking to get into startups, the first thing I would do is go to the top 10 startups that you think are interesting that are less than 50 people and email the founder and ask them if you can work for them for free. Because I think that's the best way to get in the game.
Yeah, agreed. Or what I tell people sometimes, people maybe that have either business experience or engineering experience but no product experience and think they have that next big thing that they'll get 10 million people to fall in love with. I say, hey, go work for Zynga for like 6 months, or go work for somewhere else for 6 months. Go work for a place that's known for its product management organization. Zynga happens to have one of the best in the world because of how metrics driven we've had to be on Facebook, et cetera. There's a lot of other really great examples of companies that in spaces that aren't as metrics driven, that are maybe more user focused. So I totally agree that getting a job at a place like that.
The bar is
even for
definitely
3
set high.
months
I think there's a
is
story
great.
on like what's with the dude at Foursquare? What's his name again? Tristan.
Walker.
Yeah,
Yeah,
There's
he has a
yeah,
great
where
book.
he like he writes about how he was like stalking Dennis until he got the job and all that. And it's like, let's just say that most of us, in terms of like getting an internship or working, early at a startup or even being in a BD or a reach out type role, it's like there are a lot of people who are very hungry for positions like that, and we are appreciative of people who are specifically more hungry and more tactical in getting a hold of you.
Totally.
And thanks for sharing that story, Goggin, because it was out of that story of working with the interns that you learned to focus on the vertical that you eventually chose, right?
Yeah, so I think Roger like really nailed it on the head, but I think it deserves a little bit more conversation, which is that focus is probably your number one asset as a company in terms of driving whatever metric you really want to drive. So when we first, when we had those interns over the summer, what we would do at that time, because we really didn't know any better, is we'd have every intern decide what they wanted to work on. So if you wanted to work on golf, you could work on golf. You want to work on finance, you could work on finance. Whatever you wanted to do, you need to go find instructors in that vertical. And while that got us our first couple hundred instructors, most of those instructors are not on the platform today and are pretty much useless. And the reason was because it didn't build any core community at Udemy, and so we didn't have an identity to our early users. We were just this sort of vague notion of education. And over time, we learned to highly focus on a specific vertical. So now we're entirely focused on tech. If you go on Udemy, really the only thing you can learn is programming or how to do online user acquisition. Basically the two things that we teach at Udemy, maybe something like raising capital or whatever else, but it's primarily technology like learning Ruby on Rails. And that's basically taken us from a zero revenue business for our first 10 months to a business that's paid out more than $500,000 over the last 6 months to our partner network.
So we're hearing a lot about sort of this idea of, we'll take questions after when we wrap up this conversation at the very end. So keep in mind the questions that you want for the Q&A. But we're hearing a lot about this idea of core unit of value. The reason why I wanted to bring up the Infinity G35 story was because it brought and coalesced something that was really important for you, Brian, which was the trust manifesto within your company. And it was something that you didn't actually have in place when you started.
Yeah, so when these things come in hard and fast, it's usually, this is how life works, like Murphy's Law, nothing ever works out the way when you want it to work out. And we had to immediately sort of jump into action. How do we set a standard of support where if something happens, we just do what's right? So really what our team is mandated to do is actually a lot of us have access to these support tickets. Everybody every day sort of has a chance. We have one guy who assigns everything to everybody, but we all sort of spend time working out with the users exactly what's going on, and if they have an issue, how we can make it right. And so we've specifically done one main thing that's worked really well, and that is we ask them what they want. And I know most of them will come back. You may expect them to go, and you know what would make it right is if you sent me a fucking car. And we went, no, that probably won't work well. Nobody actually said that. People are actually really nice people. A lot of them were like, well, you know what? I spent some time playing this game. It'd be awesome if I could get some iTunes credits or something. And so we started to put together a little bit of a backup sort of reward arsenal for people who may have the game may have crashed, or they may have put in the wrong email address. So we actually, the biggest support requests we get is people who get the reward usually need to put in their email address to tap redeem. And some of them may have typed too fast, or there's an autocorrect fail, and they may have put in the wrong email address. But we have a rule where anybody who comes in and says, hey, I put in the wrong email address, this was the actual one, we'll search for similar characters, and if it matches, then we'll be like, okay, this person actually got what, and then we'll send them the right reward. So we'll make sure that we do it as quick as we can. And so what it is we just realized that one of the biggest value propositions that we're offering as a branded rewards network is that people recognize the Keep brand. And so we want to make sure that everybody understands that we're being as trustworthy and as authentic with our rewards as possible. And so a lot of it is how do we make sure that we can be and do the right thing right away. And that was something that we had to develop right after this event happened. And even before, I was handling the requests myself and sort of explaining to them. And we even sent out some handwritten notes of apologies and stuff like that, so people knew that we actually knew what we were, that we knew that we had messed up and we were actually, making it right.
I can add something on the is this the core unit of value point? So one thing I see a lot investing is I see these companies aggressively optimizing on a product or a company that doesn't have a robust core value proposition. And this sounds ridiculous, but people do this all the time anyways because they've fooled themselves into believing that their product is amazing. And it's difficult as a founder not to do that because this is your baby. It's something you've thought of for a really long time. Ultimately, you're maybe not the best person to evaluate, does this have a robust core value proposition? So this is why, getting back to the point about trying to go stealth and things like that, it's important to surround yourself with peers you trust who will keep you honest and make sure that your product really does have a robust core value proposition and really optimize that before anything else. There's no reason, there's no point in even building a product, let alone building it, launching it, and trying to market it if you don't have that. So when one example that I see here that's ridiculous is people optimizing things like design. Look at Craigslist as an example, right? The design of Craigslist has never changed. It's really simple. And yet they're one of the largest websites on the internet, maybe 60 million monthly users. So I notice this a lot in Facebook because with Facebook applications, you can see traffic. It's all public. So you'd see these people that would have a really ugly application that was incredibly successful. And, there's just so many ways you can prove to yourself design isn't what matters. Having a robust core value is what matters.
How do you figure that out? So I'm sure, I hope you have a better answer than I do. My answer has always been that it's actually just super, super difficult and you kind of have to have some sort of black magic. I meet a lot of people where I don't think they have a robust core value proposition and then a year later they end up blowing up and I'm totally wrong, right? Twitter was an example of a company that I thought was ridiculous. When it first came out, and this was after it had 2 or 3 million users. I thought it was ridiculous then, right? When everybody in the technology world was using it. And I feel like I was largely proven wrong on that one. And so I always feel like it's really tough to figure that out. I don't know if either of you guys have suggestions, but.
Well, I like the core value proposition as I think of it as more of the why are you doing it rather than what exactly are you doing. And so at Keep, what we always do whenever we make any type of product change is what is the reason for this? And that usually allows you to really reduce it to what it means to you when you're creating it and what it will mean eventually to the users. What we've done is because we're a network, we have 3 different parties that we have to basically please and make sure are active and engaged and trusting in our network. And what we've done is we've created this internal messaging matrix. And it's with every core part of our network, what are we striving to do on a daily basis with these people? And for example, on the brand side, it's building as much value as we can in a medium that has largely been underutilized, which is this mobile gaming space. And then on the users, make sure that we can create and push out rewards that they all love and find relevant and comes at the right time and is easiest to redeem, all these things. So we have these sort of principles that we follow. And that's always been the best because it's actually posted on the wall. And what will happen is when we do something, it's on the wall. Are we doing that? When you have it on the wall, it's such an underutilized thing. Put shit on your walls because it's super visible and you can point to it. And having the ability to point to something is way better than going, oh, it's somewhere buried in notes in our project management system. That doesn't work. Have it on the fucking wall, right? Because that way we it's on the wall. And then everybody kind of understands that that's what we have to follow, and it becomes sort of this whole manifesto. That's really what it is how can we make it the norm? And it comes from visibility and practice. Do we actually make it happen? Does it actually operate like that in real life?
And to that point, don't just put your vision on the wall, put your users on the wall. Who are you making this product for, right? This is something we did a lot at Zynga. In the suite for Mafia Wars, we had, obviously user stories on the wall, which is standard practice from customer development and things like that. But it was incredibly helpful because you'd be talking about a feature with somebody and they'd be like, oh, well, who would use that? Or how's that going to monetize? And you could point to the wall and say, well, Bill, user profile Bill, whoever that is, would absolutely pay for this because of X, Y, Z. So, to answer, how do you figure out if you have a robust core value proposition? I would say, obviously, customer development is big. There's a lot of literature online about that. customer development, and just peer development, right? Surround yourself with people smarter than you. First of all, you should be doing that anyways. That's valuable for a number of reasons. And just, aggressively reach a point where you're self-aware about what you're doing and the product you're building through just constant contact with peers, especially people who are in relevant spaces.
One more quick thing about just user experience in general, and I like to throw out this word love. As we strive, number one, every day with our user experience and how people go through the flow for them to love our product. And the reason why that's so important, and it sounds so cliche, I know, but the reason why is because when you love something or when you love someone, you're more able to forgive them, right? When you love someone, if they make a mistake, you're actually able to forgive them. If you don't love, you maybe like them, it's like whatever. It's like when they make a mistake, you're like, I don't really know if I want to forgive this person. But when you love them, it's like, yes, you'll forgive them. So the same, I think, applies to products. Is if you love a product, you're able to forgive its shortcomings or at least temporarily, at least understand that they're working their hardest to make it better. And that's the most applicable, I think, to startups. When the product in its infancy is a certain way, people have to be sold into what the product can be. And that is a core part of how you can help them love it. Is if they love your vision, you love what they stand for, that's what will help ultimately create that relationship with your users.
Yeah. One more quick thing on that. I mean, emotion is huge. You should look at your product and think, do I have anything in this product somebody would really kill for? And that's one way you can look at your core value proposition. Is like, what is there about my product that somebody would kill for?
Great. And so on that note, we'll go ahead and turn it over to the audience. I know you had your hand up earlier, so go ahead and shoot away.
Hi, just wanted to revisit the intern subject. I'm not a lawyer, but I've had legal issues with disgruntled employees in the California State Department of Labor. You have to be really, 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 really careful about how you describe internships and employees and work and jobs, because if you post a Craigslist ad, this is more not for you guys because you're scot-free, but everyone else who thinks they're going to go do a Craigslist ad today, just be really careful about how you approach that. That's all. You have to be really careful.
Yes, there are a number of legal considerations. We consulted our lawyers and we knew exactly what we were doing. But I think the problem with comments like that and comments like Brian's, which I think is a fair and valid comment, is that the reality is that when you talk to founders behind the doors here, right, like when we're not up here, and you talk to them about how they actually started their businesses, 95% of people I've ever talked to, particularly in consumer internet, which is very different from enterprise, have done something that is borderline illegal or shady. Okay? So what's the point of FailCon if we can't talk about those things? It's so annoying.
So let me rephrase though.
No, the point is you don't want to encourage people. If you engage your lawyers, then that's awesome. You did the right thing. I think the point is there's a lot of people that I've talked to even here already this morning who are very, very early startup that don't have lawyers and they think they can just post a Craigslist ad. So had you sort of said, just as a disclaimer, by the way, we consulted lawyers, you need to be careful is all I'm saying.
Great.
I think we all agree though, but here's the thing. So when I was challenging that stuff, it was kind of like half like me just trying to fuck with you, but it's like, I mean, at the same time, it's like, just the way it seems when he describes it is not as easy as it is what you're saying. That's all we're trying to say. And it's just like, just make sure you cross your T's and dot your I's, or else you may, like when you, let's say like 5 years later, you want to IPO, it's like, oh, well you fucked with some interns like 5 years ago, like meh, meh, meh. And it's like people want to dig up dirt on you when you're doing big things, right? So that's the biggest issue. Like make sure you cross your T's and dot your I's. That's the only thing. And all I feel and how we create an internship program or whatever is just do what you feel is right. Would you want to be treated that way? That's all. And I'm sure you treated them like kings. I totally, you're a nice guy. So I have no question about that. But I'm just saying, like, just for you guys, it's like, no, it is not free labor.
Okay.
Do not do that.
That gentleman already has the microphone, so I guess you trumped that guy without the microphone. So you and then you.
Awesome. Hi, my name's Salman Ahmed, and I have a background in gaming with product and strategy, and I'm trying to leverage some of those learnings in the healthcare space now. I'm kind of knee-deep in customer development, and this question is more for Gagan and Brian, I mean, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think coding or hacking is like your core competency. So I'm curious as to how you guys minimize the chance of that eating up your time, or how you thought about the decision tree between iterating on customer development versus courting a technical co-founder versus rolling up your sleeves and just learning to do it yourself.
Are you asking about sequence? Are you asking about resource allocation? Are you asking about
Both.
Okay. I mean, you start.
Yeah, so I think that this happens with a lot of people, but like my first 2 startups failed within the first month, and they failed because I didn't have a technical co-founder. And so I realized within 1 month that like, hey, this wasn't gonna work, and I moved on. And then I did it again and realized, hey, it wasn't gonna work, and moved on. And that's when I found Udemy. And actually, technically, I'm not one of the guy who came up with Udemy. I'm the guy who joined the 2 guys who came up with Udemy. And so my response between those 3 things is I would not give 2 shits about customer development or anything else until I found a technical co-founder who I really cared about, unless I had already started a company or already had a network in which I could raise over $500,000 without a technical co-founder.
So I think it's a very delicate issue because some people obviously have a sequence that they've been used to in building things. I'm very lucky. I started designing when I was 11, so I taught myself Photoshop, and that became my technical skill. So I still encourage any of you to at least muster up some design skill. I mean, this is easily do. If you have a Mac, go on Keynote. Keynote, I think, is actually just as powerful as Photoshop in many ways to make up mock-ups. I mean, you can do gradients, you can do stroke, you can like move it around. It's like you can make stuff that looks decent. So at least learn some way of showing people what your product would look like, because that's so much more important, at least in the beginning, I think, than trying to write something or have a dog food version of your product that may work but looks like shit. So that's important, and that's what I had. That's why I was lucky enough to have that, to show people what we were going after. And my technical co-founder came from my last job, which was at Dig.
My name is Adam, and I just had a question for the founder of Udemy. When you guys were doing, was there any market validation processes that you guys went through when doing, you're trying to understand how your customers were going to respond to videos being posted up, whether or not they'd want to learn, or like how do you guys analyze the market that you're in now?
Yeah, so the short answer is no. That doesn't mean it was a good thing. It just means that the reality is when we started the business, we and I would tell you this the same thing today, we just think we're right. And so like to some extent, no. But now we do a lot of validation with our customers to figure out whether or not the new products that we're launching are accurate. So now we're already knee deep in the business. We no longer have to make a decision on whether or not like we think this market is big. We've done tons of analysis. We now have thousands of users, well, more than thousands of users, but thousands of instructors. And like now the question is not whether or not the overall marketplace business of Udemy is there a market for that? The question is, for each individual vertical or category or product development feature that we create, is this something that our users currently want? And there's a number of ways we go about determining that, including talking to our customer. I mean, you can read any lean startup conversation to understand that. But I think market validation, one of the challenges is that like there's no market study that's going to tell you that like in 1995 there was no market study that told you that e-commerce was going to be the biggest business on the internet, like one of the biggest businesses on the internet, or social networking, or mobile. It just doesn't exist. And so it's so hard to figure out whether or not people will want a product that won't be valuable until 5 years after the business has started. So like Udemy inherently is only valuable when we build a marketplace. The product is cool, like I like it a lot. I love the fact that we make it easy for people to create a course. And I also find it valuable that there's lots of courses on there, but it's only gonna be achieve its ultimate vision 5 years from now when you can go on udemy.com and you can learn anything you can possibly wanna learn, period, from the best people in the world. And how do you validate that market?
We have time for one more question. I know the person in the back has had his or her hand up.
And I just wanted to say, being nice to your interns, a lot of them will, there are grants, especially if they're full-time students, there are grants that will pay for their research if you can put it in a way that benefits their academic work also as independent studies. But you have to be really careful if you and that's really great for them is you can get them academic credit and reward them in because you don't have money, so you reward them other ways. But if you do that, you gotta be really, really careful, because sometimes, depending on the stipulations of the grant, they will wind up with their work in the public domain. So, like, they're really like incredible, wonderful resource. And if you can cut off a little chunk of your business that you're okay sharing with everyone, everybody can really win out of that exchange.
Great, thank you. Cass, do we have time for one more
Yeah,
question?
let's do one quick question.
Okay.
Someone think of-
Burning hand, been fire over there.
I saw it, yes.
Thank you. Great talk, guys. My name is Andrew Lauer-Baronoff, and by the way, regarding Keynote, there's a set of open source mock-up tools for mobile apps that are available if you Google search. So definitely use them for that. One question is about beta. So I've read a lot of blog entries that said private betas should never be paid. Then I started using a service called Cabana, where they charge $15 to do a beta. So if you're building a product that you will end up charging for, at what point do you draw the line and say, I'm not just testing it with users, I'm gonna actually start to try to make some money, and like, when do you start charging?
When they're willing to pay you.
As early as possible.
Agree with both of those. But I would say after the product has settled in terms of, at least in terms of your MVP, because you don't want to be changing people's data around. So if you think you've gotten to a point where their data will remain stable and you at least have a migration routine you could run to move their data from version to version, at the very least, if you have that, then you could monetize. Because if you notice with a lot of social games, they'll go live and you'll see them saying, oh, hey, you should use this product, but we're still in beta, so things might be changing. You see that a lot, and I don't think at that point you should be charging.
Thanks very much.
Super, thank you guys. Thank you all.